Hello, everyone. So I'm here today on kind of an impromptu stream with fellow Substacker Derek Suszko. So I guess an introduction is in order. I think that we've been back and forth, and this has kind of been a persistent dialogue that I've had with a lot of people, most notably Walt Bismarck, although those conversations are on Substack and not on YouTube. But there's been a conversation on basically how young men should approach the modern world, whether the ethics of more traditional Christianity are a good fit for them, or whether people need something different. And, usually the rival is some form of Nietzschean vitalism. This has kind of been going on for a while. And very ironically enough, although I don't necessarily want to steer the conversation in this direction unless you want to go there, a persistent kind of piece of advice that gets spun on these platforms is whether young men should be open to dating women that have specific mental health disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder. Now, I don't know. Obviously, after we had the conversation about the borderline personality disorder girlfriend, I went and read a bunch of your stuff. It's very good. And, one of the main reasons I should say that I'm given this conversation such priority, I don't always necessarily turn all the conversations into YouTube videos that I have on Substack, is that, I learned from your blog that you're actually organizing in real life. And I want to pay a large amount of respect to the people who are actually doing things in real life. But just so I don't straw man you and kind of trying to introduce the topic on my channel, I know you write about aristocracy and vitalism, and like a lot of other people who write in a similar vein, a lot of this comes down to young men and how they handle relationship dynamics. So how would you kind of lay out your own position on this topic, and how do you see it differing from the kind of I don't know what I really call myself, but I think in this conversation, the most notable thing about me is that I kind of subscribe to a more or less ordinary Catholic perspective on the conduct of young men and what is a good life strategy going forward. I don't deviate largely from what was considered sane. I don't like the word trad, but I don't deviate largely from what was considered sane before 1972, which is what the internet calls trad. But it's just normal before the 70s. So without further ado, maybe I should let Derek, lay out your position on this, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I think calling me a Nietzschean vitalist is fair. I do write about aristocracy, and I often compare it with the bourgeoisie. And I get so much flack for using that term because I use it all the time. And the point I'd make is that they are actually like psychobiological states of cognition. I believe they're genetic. And so an aristocratic view of the world is due to genetics. It's due to certain things being carried down a bloodline. It's due to certain social status that has been retained by your bloodline in the past. And what I would call the bourgeoisie, that is also a psychocognitive state that historically arose in the 16th century, although it existed in its, I guess you'd call it proto-bourgeois form far before then.
In the Reformation, you mean?
The Reformation, yeah, that was the, well, no, so what I do is I say, for most of history, there's always been social class, right? There's been aristocrats, there's been peasants, and there's been something in the middle. And that social class has carried certain psychogenetic features. That's basically what I would say my overarching civilizational theory is.
I would agree with that. That's observation. A fact I'd agree with.
Say that again.
So I would agree with that observation that different populations of people carry different genetic qualities, and you can see these break down both on a racial level and on a class level. As you're bringing up right now, there's a different kind of way, a different kind of mode in which people who are descended from aristocrats behave than the people who are descended from, peasants like myself, or, landowning peasants like myself, or people who are, descended from outright serfs or whatnot. I think that's just an observable fact. I'd agree with that.
So yeah, so the consequence of having this in the genetic bloodlines is when you turn into a semi-egalitarian society or a full egalitarian society, you get certain people who can't adjust, certain people who adjust very well. And one of my contentions, and this is what I call the hard argument on the BPD question. Soft argument is that you're a downwardly mobile man, you don't have a lot of options, you should consider women with mental illness so that you can save your lineage. The hard argument is that women with BPD have disinhibitory cognition that is related to aristocratic bloodline descent. And that's about as radical as it gets.
But that is highly speculative, though.
It's very speculative. Yeah,
it's highly speculative. Well, okay. I mean, let me react, I guess. I mean, look, we kind of, the observation that there are lineage differences between peoples, I think, is fairly uncontroversial. And I've heard similar things from Nietzscheans. I'm not so sure this is the same argument that, Bap or Walt Bismarck would make, although I've heard similar things from them. I know they're not the same brand of Nietzschean or a vitalist or whatever, but, I'm grouping this together. I guess sort of the frustration that I have when I encounter these arguments is, A, they're highly theoretical. You're taking a map of a genetic pattern that we both think probably happened, and then we're mapping the pattern of that genetic lineage from 400 years ago onto mental patterns and mental pathologies that we see in the modern world. And I don't even understand the basis for thinking that even might be true. I don't see any reason why women who are highly disagreeable and highly neurotic would be more likely to be descended from the aristocratic strains. As a matter of fact, I see the exact opposite of that being true. And I in all this too, there's one kind of persistent, maybe you could help me here with this. This is my persistent problem with interacting and against these Nietzschean vitalist things is when we talk about modern Christians and modern people who are living trad, boring lifestyles like myself, we're really examining like a set of people who are living a life, like a real life in the world, right? These people, these are actually, and there's lots of things to complain about, like modern Christian family life is incredibly poisoned by modernity. But when they get compared to things like Nietzschean vitalism, you're talking about things like, I have never seen somebody live the kind of aristocratic life that you're talking about. Like, if you told me that you did, I mean, I'd have to take your word for it, A. And B, of the people who have told me that they've lived these like Nietzschean vitalist lives, when I actually like meet them in person and I see their lives, it like has no resemblance to the theory at all. I've lived in, a variety of urban areas, and I've known a lot of artistic types, and a lot of them were Nietzschean, and a lot of them went after crazy chicks, and it never worked out practically. It resulted, it probably hurt their reproductive possibilities if it didn't outright end them. And so I guess what's kind of my frequent irritation with these contests between the Nietzscheans and the Christians that pop up periodically is we're comparing something that exists to something, for all I know, doesn't really exist. It's like a theory and a projection, and I mean, really a conjecture when it comes to this idea that borderline personality disorder women are more aristocratic. I mean, I would need to see a lot of evidence for that, because I would assume aristocratic women tend to be low in neuroticism typically. That's typically, you consider aristocratic temperament to be low in big five personality trait neuroticism, but BPD women are characteristically highly neurotic.
So I'm going to make a distinction that I don't know if psychiatry makes, but I make it, which is there's a difference between disinhibition and neuroticism. And so, in other words, a person who's neurotic, they're having problems because they are repressed. A person who's disinhibited, they're having problems because they are not repressed.
But you're talking about trait openness then, right? I mean, roughly, that's what DSM is. That's if you were to use Big Five, that would be a more
Yeah. So
approximate.
when you call someone like an actually like a girl is an actually diagnosed with BPD neurotic,
Mhm.
I
That's
think
established in
that's
the literature, by the way. There are studies, and this is what I've known from when you study BPD, or if you just ask your favorite AI, map BPD conditions onto Big Five personality traits. What you get is no relationship to trait openness and high relationship. BPD women are highly neurotic and high and low agreeableness. That is how they measure on the BPD scale. You can type it into Google and see it in the literature if you want.
well, I don't necessarily deny that. What I deny is why those behaviors are being displayed. And so the this is the anchor. The anchor here is my word disinhibition. So a BPD girl is extremely open to experience. Would you grant that?
No, absolutely. The research is not. I mean, I guess if we're inventing like a new word that we mean, like
Well,
when we say BPD, we mean highly open. The research does not show a relationship between
but hold on.
borderline personality disorder just correlates mostly with neuroticism, not openness.
So openness to experience, which
That's what openness is. Yes, the Big Five personality trait, openness.
so I'm going to dispute that. I'm not. I know you're using the big five,
Hmm.
but you've talked about your own experience with BPD girls,
Yeah.
and a lot of them were far more willing. I mean, sexually, uh, they take risks that other girls don't take. They are very ready to do things that other girls aren't willing to do. They are emotionally volatile, but they're also emotionally open, which means they will show their emotions in a way that others will not. So,
They're
I
not
mean,
generally open. They're open because they're experiencing like the breaking white on you. Like if you catch them at a certain phase of their cycle, right? The BPDs go in cycles, right? They really like you and then they really hate you. And so if you catch them at a certain phase of that, they are open, but then they will become suddenly not open, which is why there's no correlation or very little correlation between trait openness and borderline personality disorder, as far as the research that I have read.
well, I mean, we could spend this whole discussion, I
Yeah,
think.
maybe shouldn't belabor that point.
Well, I could. I mean, in other words, I don't deny that some of what I'm suggesting is going against established psychiatry,
Mhm.
and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm controversial for saying it on there, because people say, "What standing do you have to say this?" Based off of no clinical research.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you cut out? I think you're frozen. Maybe you want to reload. I guess since you look like you're frozen, and I guess hopefully I'm not frozen here. Maybe I should reload mine. But I guess what I would say is that um, let's see what's happening here. Did I totally lose Derek? Or okay, well, it looks like Derek's frozen. Um, I don't want to talk to Derek when he's not here, but I mean, my main issue with this again is that I think most people who date people who have, I don't even know what we mean when we say borderline, right? Do we just mean women who are highly open? And that might be a different subject. The the problem with borderline is obviously uh, the fact that the neuroticism is so high, and that comes back and bites you in the butt eventually. So hopefully Derek's able to rejoin us. I don't know exactly what happened. um this is interesting. Oh, okay, well, we're gonna get added back in. Okay, you there? Sorry, you cut
Yeah.
off midstream, and I didn't want to just start refuting you or disagreeing with you before you laid out your case, so please take the floor.
Yeah. So I think a lot of psychiatry gets bogged in a bit of semantics.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can use big five traits. The thing about any personality disorder is it's based off of observed behavior. So
Yes.
they say like you have BPD, all that means is that they're going down a checklist and they're saying, well, we see this, we see this, we see this, and so that fact of it means that it is basically an observational science, and we're not far at all in understanding psychogenetics. And there's various theories on, latent genes that might be exposed to a certain environment that then produce a personality disorder. All of that is very nascent, and most of the practice of psychiatry is based on managing symptoms. And so use like I like the cluster B designation, of which BPD is a part.
Okay. Cluster B.
Yeah, and narcissistic personality is also a part.
Okay.
And the reason I like it is because it's defined by this word disinhibition, disinhibitory disorder. And disinhibition is, to me, a certain psychocognitive mode that most of the aristocrats of history displayed.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, that's an unfalsifiable claim, and so you could dispute it.
Sure.
But if you look at like a lot of the aristocratic families of Europe, like the Medicis and the Romanovs, I mean, there's a lot of extravagant personal behavior. It's like there's grandiosity, there's violent outbursts, there's alcoholism. It's basically sort of like, you don't get the sense reading the history of the European aristocracies that these people are like a siloed self. In other words, they're extremely responsive to instinct and, impulse. And
they take a lot of risks. I'll grant you that.
Right. And they like to go to war, and they like the adrenaline of all kinds of things. And you say, well, that's anyone who gets to, a position of high social class.
Yeah, maybe. Exactly. So my case would be that I would put it to you this way, right? I would wager, and I don't have studies to back this up either. I would wager that if you looked at two classes, you look at people who are descendant from these families, genetically these days, you would see people who are highly conscientious. They would be high risk takers. That would be, equivalent to what you're pointing out. But if you look at all the things like hard drinking, thrill seeking, if you compared those descendants of aristocrats who are, running companies right now, because it tends to correlate with success being descendants of aristocrats, if you compare them to lottery winners from like the peasant class, or from like, or like African American lottery winners, for instance, would be a good example. They would have more of those like highly open narcissistic behaviors than would the aristocrats. Because those behaviors exist in the aristocrats historically, because they're the only people who can do those things and not instantly kill themselves. If a peasant did that, they would just destroy themselves instantly. And if they even had the opportunity to do those things, which most of them didn't. So, when it comes to risk taking, like calculated risk taking in an entrepreneurial sense, that is, I think a very good quality of aristocracy. And I think you can see it inside the people who are descendant from aristocrats. I don't think that this maps well to these cluster B personalities or to this socially destructive behavior. If you take your average gambler, your average alcoholic, your average promiscuous person in San Francisco, you are not getting a good mapped aristocratic temperament. I can tell you that. I mean, is that what you see in your personal life? If you hang around people who have these like chronic gambling addictions and cluster B personality types, if you just randomly select from that group, do you think that you get an approximation of aristocracy from that?
No, but that's because the peasant caste is disinhibited also. So you have this.
Then your signal is completely useless, because the peasant class outnumbers the aristocrats 10-1. So, is she experiencing this disinhibition because she's an aristocrat and has a propensity for taking risks in a calculated way, or is she just like a crazy peasant girl who's like drunk and addicted to gambling? and has a bunch of cluster B personality disorders. Well, the odds are that she is the former, just because of the numbers, right?
Yeah, but it's not a crapshoot. So in other words, this is why I often say, the BPD art ho. So you can see, I mean, and I don't want to point you to anyone, but you can see hundreds of these girls on Substack. They're all
Oh yeah,
over.
I know them.
And these are like, you can tell they're smart. So you're like, well, she can write a bit. She can, she's got some literary flair or something. Like you can tell she's smart, but
I know a
she's
lot of BPD art well, I don't use the art hosts. I know a lot of BPD art girls in my time.
yeah. So
And
these
a lot of
girls,
them were closer to the crazy peasants than they were to the risk-taking aristocrats. But
well, in
there you
certain
go.
behaviors, absolutely. But in the sense of like, if you're looking for certain things like IQ, she's got it. Even if she's doing things that you might say, well, that's stupid practically, or I mean, she's got the intelligence, she's just unhinged. And so the so like the point about that is that there's obviously a difference between a girl who crashes out of uni, like a good university, just because she's just mentally unstable and she goes and works as a bartender, and a woman who like was born like to a extremely poor family and is just hooked on drugs, who could never get into the school. So like they're both disinhibited. So in other words, their behavior is basically, they have an externalized self. But there are other major differences, being aspects of intelligence, perhaps aspects of physical beauty. Like there's all kinds of
Well,
differences that you
why
obviously see.
wouldn't you just, if the point is to get intelligence and beauty, why wouldn't you just pick for intelligence and beauty? Why would you try to pick these traits that are very negative? And I think much more common is just social dysfunction, and a rather poor marker for this like trace aristocracy, low risk, high what is it, like high tolerance for risk.
Because they're
To
negative.
me, it would just be so much easier if you were so fascinated on, look, I mean, if you wanted to procreate with a descendant of the aristocrats, uh marrying someone who had high IQ and was really, really attractive would be your best shot, because those are way more correlated with the good aristocratic genes. And there's not this confounding variable that comes from people just being crazy, addicted narcissists that will, destroy your destroy your life if they are given a chance to.
Well, so my answer to that is that pathology is dependent on the kind of social order. And that's another thesis that, again, it's making a unfalsifiable relativist claim. Um,
Mhm.
but, and I hinted at it before, which is basically certain pathologies manifest in certain social orders because of those social orders. Now, you can say, well, someone might develop BPD, but because of genetic predisposition and some trauma that happened, and that does go on. But a lot of times the trauma is the actual social order, the actual mode of life in which they have to navigate. And so this is a central contention of any vitalist, which is we live in a uniquely anti-biological social order.
Mhm.
So in other words, not for everyone. I mean, if you crash out of the middle class, you can behave like a bohemian and no one's going to stop you. If you're in the elite, who knows what they do. But by and large, there's all the middle class expectations, like delayed marriage, delayed childbearing. You use your 20s to establish a middle-aged career.
But do
All
people actually go ahead? Sorry, I don't interrupt you.
so like all the things related to like the sex hangups people have. So like, well, you can't date someone 6 years younger than you or something in your 20s. Like
Mhm.
all of these things are evidence of a uniquely anti-biological, and I'll
I
use
agree
like,
to that.
so it's like, what does someone who has functioning hormones do? And like, this is my point, that a lot of the mental illness you see and it's exploded, and tech, and then like the tech revolution is the biggest cause of it. But a lot of the mental
Yeah, the tech
illness
really.
it's because the social order is more anti-biological at this time in history.
You might have gotten lost again. You're dropping a lot. Well, I mean, look, since it might have to get you back on again. Uh, I mean, look, as much as I really hate having to answer a person who's frozen because I feel like I'm taking up. Oh, you're back. Okay, go ahead. Keep on going.
Yeah, it's I think we have some cutouts here. I've
Mm.
used I've done some video at this location a few times. Hopefully it lets up. Sorry about that.
No, no problem.
So my point is that
I'll grant that we're in a uniquely anti-biological age. Like that's granted. We are totally at the same page with that. We're so totally on the same page that aristocratic gene
okay,
lines probably have good, are good. We should expect to see good things from aristocratic gene lines. We have reason to believe that. I'm on board with those two things. I think that's our common ground, certainly.
okay, will you take the next step and say that certain observed pathologies like BPD are because the social order is anti-biological?
Yes, I would say that is true, but that is mostly due to social media. I think that it's mostly due to social media. It's certainly not from lack of having sex. Right now we're in a sex recession, but we had a high point of that stuff in the 70s and 80s, and this mental illness stuff was skyrocketing. And our procreation rates were dropping then too. So, these things are all kind of disconnected.
Well, no. So I think even as you say, yeah, you can you can have your fun. Nobody's stopping you. So
Yeah.
in that sense, it's a promiscuous society for those who want it,
You can have as
and for
much sterile sex as you want, and
right, right.
that's most of the sex you will be having in these situations. The number of people I know that have procreated with, as you put it, art hose is minuscule. This is the least fertile class you can imagine.
Yeah,
Did you catch
and
that? So yeah, okay.
yeah, I got it. So let me just back up to one thing, which is you said, okay, I agree that the social order and the cultural order that we have is fairly anti-biological, and that can lead to psychological difficulty. And so the original post about the BPD girl that set all this
Mhm,
off was I was talking about two girls that I knew, and it it wasn't like they had sex lives. They weren't in any sense. I mean, they were sleeping, like they were doing what they wanted to do
mhm,
with who they wanted to do. The thing that
okay,
was hanging them up was all this petty stuff that they have to do because no man would do it for them. So they were getting their sex fix, but what they were not getting was like this. I, I don't want to care about my taxes and my paperwork and my rent and these are things like I think somebody made the comment on the bottom of your post, which is women were doing this at any given point. Like they were doing this all through history. So to say like women don't have petty concerns now, or they have petty concerns now and they didn't in the past, that's not true. But there was a certain type that did not. And this is my point at
I
like
might be missing. What do you mean by petting concerns?
so so
Can you
so
specify what the concern actually is?
yeah, so it's like the daily grind of just eking out an existence. So
Okay.
it's encounters with bureaucracy, it's doing taxes and handling insurance and getting car repairs and
Hmm.
uh, getting paid. Like it's all the minutia that everyone has to do in an atomized social order.
Yeah.
Um, so like 60 years ago or 100 years ago, a lot of this, like if you were a middle class wife, you weren't necessarily doing this. Now you were doing
You're
domestic
doing
thing.
other things, yeah.
Right, right.
And they were complaining about it that then too, right? You
Well,
know?
sure, because
Yeah.
you're not gonna do anything unless the guy who you're doing it for is worth it. And so that's another problem. But basically, there's a large class of girls who develop these psychological problems solely because they actually get run into the ground mentally by all this petty crap that and they've told me this, and I believe them because I just see it over and over, which is like they're like, someone should be taking care of this, and they have it almost as like a biological expectation, and they're like, I'm a hormonal war zone, and I'm basically like oscillating emotionally, and I have all these emotional and sexual needs, and I'm like trying to make a career, and I have to think about all this stuff, you
I'll,
know?
I'll reach for common ground. Women want a man, and I wrote this in a bunch of my posts too. If you women want a man with a plan, and the thing that really grates on them with all of this stuff, this minutia, and why it grates on them more than caring for children, is because they're the primary owners of a plan for the future. And what women would really want, and which would definitely help their mental health, is if a man could come and take ownership over the long-term plans so they could focus more on the day-to-day stuff. And I think that would help a lot with the female mental health crisis. Uh, and but that's only going to happen if there's, I mean, no woman is going to allow a man to do that for her unless she thinks the man's going to be committed to her long term. I mean, she's not going to let a man plan her long term future if he's not invested in her in some long term way.
No. Um, also,
So
also if he's not biologically fit enough. So I
yeah, I
mean,
mean, biological fit, I mean, maybe we're operating in different circles, but I knew a lot of guys, like I said, who were into like in the East Bay of California and all these places who were into these BPD ho people in the rationalist circles. These men are fit enough, right? These are advanced engineers, they're in startups, like they can handle people's taxes and planning people's 401ks. That's not the issue. The issue with them not planning for these BPD women is there's no commitment, and the guys don't want to commit to these women, and then the women go insane.
right. So I'm saying, what if you actually committed?
Well,
And
I
I'm
mean,
not,
that sounds, dare I say, a little bit trad, though, doesn't it?
well, and that's where this whole thing was like,
Mm-hmm.
like all the really, really vicious attacks that came at me were basically saying you're you're like you want to start a sex cult and you want to be polygamous with everybody and you want to destroy Christian trad marriage. I've never said that. I've said that basically, if you're a downwardly mobile man, white man, and you've been priced out of, I would say, quote unquote, respectable marriage options, that is, women who basically have a career, they're doing the usual middle class thing, they're making more than you'll make, then you should look to some of these girls that have bottomed out too with psychological problems who are also intelligent enough and good looking enough.
and
That's what I've said.
and
And
marry and marry them. I mean, this is the
yes,
the danger here. And my one reservation I have on, unfortunately, the reason why this elicited I don't think I attacked you viciously. I can't say for whatever commenters said or whatever, but I mean, like, this did come up in the response, is that I had a variety of previous relationships with women who suffered from these kind of bipolar disorder symptoms. And these women are not easy to manage. I mean, they have cluster B personalities. We're talking about narcissists. We're talking about people who, and if you can stay on the right side of the BPD stuff, but the second you can't, your relationship will start going downhill so fast, and their ability to control it or pull it out of the fire will be very, very limited. If I were to talk to young guys, I would, I don't necessarily know I like this BPD thing because it really kind of obscures, because I don't even know what we're talking about. But usually when I associate the BPD women, I think highly neurotic women, women who are experiencing negative emotions a lot. And that is definitely what you see in these cluster B narcissists, cluster B BPD people, is this high level of neuroticism. This is what is very dangerous for young men, because it's great when you're in the beginning of the relationship, but then you like trip one or two, you go through one or two things, you push past her emotions in the wrong way, and suddenly she's your mortal enemy. And you're like, how do you come back for that? Well, if you're if you're somebody who's rich, probably you can. Or if you're somebody who's very confident, probably you can. If you're somebody who isn't, you have a major problem on your hands. And that's how you get stalkers. That's how you get, people accusing you of SA. That's how you get people coming after you in HR. And, that is what I think. I mean, practically speaking, that is like my real concern about this. And it also helps. I mean, do you know anyone who's made this model work? I mean, like in real life, right? Is this something that we're kind of like speculating on, or is this something that I just can't think of many men, especially many kind of like down and out men, whose lives have been turned around by marrying a woman who's had an enormous number of cluster B narcissistic personality traits. It usually works the opposite. Usually, I've known men who've been helped out by marrying women, but usually it's the women who've really helped them out have been the women who've kind of not had so many of those cluster B personality traits. And the only men that I've known who've been able to handle these women with this narcissistic personality traits are men who have had a lot of confidence and a lot of money, so that they were able to insulate the storm that eventually blew back in their direction.
So, yeah, I do know a lot of men of my class, which is now the service class, who have actually essentially tamed a BPD girl.
Okay.
And now you can say, well, stand by. Let's see. Let's give it a few years. But they have kids,
Oh,
and
okay.
they're married, and they're going good. And in this case, like a lot of it was like she was she was a university girl. She was going for like a degree, a normal like bourgeois career, whatever. She had a crisis. She bottomed out. She started working in service, and then like she got with a totally blue collar, like family's been in service for generations. Like that's the guy she got, and they married, and she was like ecstatic with it, at least thus far. So like I tried to address this in a couple of the notes I put up, which is, yeah, being a BPD wrangler is really hard. It's not like when I say like, okay, these women are vital, like you should want it, like I've never ignored the caveat of you are going to be on a roller coaster in some cases through hell. And so I've never actually refuted any of the people who say, this is like you're going to have terrible blowups. And I wrote a note about my own experience, and basically like the thing you have to do is you have to be the master of her nervous system. You basically have to have a total read on her swings, which takes a little bit of saturation. But once you have that, then your job is to basically show her that no matter how crazy that. Can you hear me?
You broke up a little bit, but I think you're back now. You said your job is to make sure, and then you broke off.
Your job is to make sure she knows that you could be crazier than her if you want.
Well, look, I mean, I can't argue with results. I mean, it just, look, I mean, I actually kind of do believe that most women out there are, there's a man that can kind of control them and take responsibility of them and do what's necessary with them. So I guess maybe the positions are less far away than I initially anticipated. I guess, from my own experience, I've just seen these cluster B women ruin so many men. And so many men that had more resources and more confidence than me initially, I've had some of these women try to destroy me, from my distant past. And it's one of the things that when I look back on my own life, I wish I could erase from my past, was my experience with these types of women more than anything else. And so I guess, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the odds are for you to kind of play the Russian roulette with this kind of woman, but some women will be just impossible. It's not. I mean, if you were a man that is not rich, uh, it's very likely that these types of women could ask for things that you just can't provide, and then when you can't provide them, then suddenly she is your enemy. And it's not like you did anything wrong, or you didn't execute proper game. It's just the fact that she has a mental illness, she got one-shotted by modernity, and now she's reacting to some kind of trend that she saw on social media. And she wants you to support Black Lives Matter or Palestinian rights, or let's get rid of white men, TM, whatever the cause of the day is, and you're on the wrong side of that. And then zero ability to regulate, and suddenly you've got a person that can destroy your life out to get you. And I've seen that play out so many times that I think that there are situations where it can work, but it seems like you're kind of stacking a lot of risk on yourself, especially if there are other options out there.
But are there other options? So let's take the practical angle
I think
for
there
a
are.
second,
Mhm.
which is, whenever I make these kind of posts, I always preface it with, I encourage downwardly mobile men who, sensitive young men, the kind of people who are on the internet a lot, who are not going to be as rich as their parents, uh, who are thinking about women all the time, and who perhaps don't have a lot of experience with them, and saying, who should you go for? And the thing about the BPD girl, or the disinhibited girl, or the girl with, psychological problems, is that she actually gives you a ton of confidence, even if she also gives you hell. And you just made that point, which is that, like, when you actually have like a woman who's not actually like rationally calculating you, and you can say maybe deep down she is,
Yeah.
or maybe, but the thing is like that level of openness most guys have never had, and
Well, I feel
especially,
like I'm arguing cutting against two things. First of all, it sounds like you're getting these women to kind of like kiss me Kate, taming of the shrew, make them wives because you just have such, poise and control over them. Now it sounds like you're saying going with the BB chick means like taking them on, not fixing their problems, and this just using them to get kind of sexual confidence in yourself.
well, no, because I would absolutely encourage like young men to actually procreate with them. One, and I would say you're going to go through hell, and you're going to have to be very emotionally sturdy. If you do not have that sturdiness, then maybe don't do it. But you can actually develop that sturdiness by trying to do it. So, like, this is the thing where it's like you don't get anything in nature for free. So it's like
Hmm.
it's like if you meet a girl, and like, who seems too good to be true. She's like she's all over you, like she wants to hang out, she's the one texting you, she's the one that's initiating, and you're like, what's up with this, what's going on? There is going to be a massive, like, payback. Like, you're going to have to pay for that, and as you say, you pay for it in the terms of her complete mood shifts, her emotional problems, her, threats of self-harm, or like guilt tripping. Like, you do pay
If
for
I
it.
if I married a BPD woman, the most thing that I'd be afraid of if I married her was that she'd find her way into a group chat or a TikTok group, and then, like most BPD women do, they get totally enthralled by whatever the current obsession is at that moment. And then they get this idea that they're in a righteous crusade against you for not towing the progressive line, which is what most of these group chats do. And it is very easy for me to imagine a woman that has a high cluster B personality trait falling into that. And if you have a ring on it and you've procreated with them, the amount of damage they can do to you is quite high. Now, I am against all of these incel influencers who are like, if she can divorce you, that means you should never get married. Yeah, by all means, get married. But I think that you have to, when people exhibit BPD qualities, this is a liability. This is not a green flag. This is a liability that you're taking on, presumably because she's offering you some asset in a different area, right? So if you have the option of getting the same girl, one with BPD and one with the opposite traits of BPD, you'd always take the opposite, the non-BPD girl in that situation.
I would say it's closer to a toss-up than you're framing it there. So in other words, like, what, you're not going to have a dead bedroom if you marry a BPD girl. You might get divorced, raped, you might get stalked, you might get your tires slashed.
Look, I
but you
mean,
want a bedroom. Like
you're gonna have a dead. You're gonna have a, but no, but that's not true though, because if she breaks against you and decides that she's now your enemy, you will have a dead bedroom. Like you mean like
dead in your bedroom.
as you get older, the woman's sex drive will, like I say before, I say this with people who are considering, dating women from other races. You will never date an exotic woman. You will never marry an exotic woman. You can date exotic women, but it's impossible to marry exotic women, because once you marry her, she will no longer be exotic. She will just be your wife, right? So a lot of men, and I'm not categorically against interracial marriage or anything like that. I think it's risky though, right? Because initially it's really hot because it's exotic and it's new, but that doesn't last. And the thing is, I'm not so sure that, marrying a BPD woman in, the sex is hot when you're 22, but that's not a solution to dead bedroom when you're 42. The idea that this carries over to that problem 20 years down the line, I think is highly questionable. I've never seen that work. And I should know, I'm in my 40s now, right? So like I don't see, I'm guessing, right? Because I don't know how my friends how my friends married sex lives are, but the women who are, the women who were highly BPD, most of them are divorced now, right? So I don't know, that strikes me as like strange, like, so I don't know, I don't trust that metric of prediction, I guess you could say.
Well, so I think I like thinking in class terms, which some people say you can't do if you're on the right. But I think in some cases you have to. So if you want sort of the standard middle class life, like where you're dual income, you can buy a property, at this point in your late 30s maybe. Some people do it earlier, but you can basically scale up, and you can save enough, and you can have a decent retirement, and you can have 3 kids, and so everyone knows that is becoming more difficult, right?
Yes, it is.
So everyone acknowledges that. Now, I'm saying that instead of saying like that's my ambition, you're basically embracing the fact that that is not your class. That was your parents' class, your grandparents' class, but that is not going to be your class. You are not going to be able to do that. And so, and I'm not preaching doomerism. I'm not saying like you shouldn't make money or you shouldn't try to make money. I'm saying that for a huge number of people, they are going to be downwardly mobile. They're not going to have the same options and wealth as their parents. And I think that should change how they view certain social practices like marriage. And so, like, if you were to, like, it wouldn't even have been a question with my parents. Like, they were PhDs. It wouldn't even been a question. Like, you would marry someone at your education level, right? You're not going to dip into even an undergrad, like a person with a BA. You're certainly not going to dip into someone who doesn't even have a degree at all.
I don't know. My father was a PhD and he married a bachelor, so that generally doesn't apply. I don't think. But I'm sorry. I'm nitpicking you. I shouldn't do that.
But I'm actually curious about that. So your dad's PhD.
Mm-hmm. I have a PhD too. For my sins, it isn't doing me any good.
And your mom was what? Did she have a?
When he married her, she was a student. Actually, this was back in the 70s, so that was still legal.
Oh yeah, well,
it's a little bit. I'm getting a little bit into. I mean, these people are, this is a generation that's long since passed. We're talking about things that was like 50 years ago. So, who cares, right? But this is, a different world, right? Look, I mean, class divisions. I don't know. I mean, lower class. I just think that dead bedroom, if that's the concern, 99% of dead bedrooms are caused by either the man not initiating enough or the woman being like having active animosity towards the man. Like she just doesn't like him, or there's something biologically wrong with women. Once you hit your 40s, then you start getting into just the naturally declining, that's when, once you probably more like your 50s, actually, that's when you naturally hit the decline, from what I've heard. And I just don't think that like women's sexual openness on the first date and their desire to do crazy stuff in bed is a good predictor of sexual compatibility 20 years down the line. And especially since most sexual incompatibility is caused by the fact that one partner is either unhealthy or one partner is actively sabotaging the relationship once you get past the initial honeymoon stage.
Well, so I don't, you're right that it's not a good, so like sexual enthusiasm in your 20s is not a good predictor of sexual compatibility in your 40s, but it is a good predictor of robust offspring. And I don't even mean that like, I mean that literally. Like this whole notion of like, you're supposed to find your person that you can tolerate in middle age, and you wait it out, and like you're supposed to, like nature says you're supposed to have children with the person who sexually excites you. That like to me
that's never been in human civilization. That's never been the standard.
Well, it's because
that has never been. The aristocrats didn't follow that standard in ancient Europe. They didn't follow that standard in ancient Rome. They didn't follow that standard in ancient Egypt.
Well, I would,
you should, if you're a man, you should be sexually attracted by almost any woman who's not obviously unhealthy. And if you're a woman, you were expected inside civilization to go with the man that you were assigned to.
Yeah, but you're talking in kind, I'm talking in degree. So I'm talking about the woman who like really like the woman in your sphere who you really, really want. So
what about it?
Well, that's the person.
Aristocrats are not aristocrats. We need to be clear about this. If we're talking about aristocratic lineages, like the people who descended from the Medicis or whatever, these people are not products of hormonal relationships. These are products of arranged marriages. There are bastard lineages that for one generation were the products of hormonal relationships, and then they went back to arranged marriages. But most aristocratic lineages are 100% arranged marriages for the hundreds or so years that they've existed. And even their bastard distaff cousins, once they, become recognized again, they go back to the arranged marriage model. So this idea that pair bonding is largely hormonally driven is not the case. If you're a man and you're healthy, I mean, let's be honest, most women should, you should be capable with pairing with them. And this idea that you're picking from a variety of ones from which one is like the absolute hottest, I can't find that model anywhere in human civilization at scale.
So I'd say with a healthy aristocracy, you're right. It's not this you fall in love and it's all passion and stuff. But what it is eugenic. In a healthy aristocracy. In a decadent aristocracy, you see things like, well,
but
we
I mean,
need this
whether it's eugenic or not, does it? I don't think, I'm not accusing it of being dysgenic. I'm accusing what you're saying as not existing.
No, but
So
what I'm
that's a
saying,
bigger problem, right? Like I'm just saying that what you put forward has not existed in really any time in the
well,
last 3,000 years that I can think of.
so my concern is like if you so my concern, I mean, I guess I'll say it. My concern is eugenics. So if you're an aristocrat, that's your dad's
But it has to
arranging.
exist for it to be eugenic. That's what I think, that's the disconnect, right? Like,
I think I'm tracking you, which is you're saying that I just said that who you're like sexually excited by is a natural signal of a eugenic match.
uh well, that is what I said. Yeah, I think that is, I'm sure there's a slight correlation in that regard. But what I'm saying is that the eugenic matches that you introduced the stream pointing to, which were the aristocratic bloodlines, those were not in any way influenced by what you're telling me is your eugenic, indicator function. As a matter of fact, they were less determined by that than the peasant lines that you identified as being relatively less eugenic. So I'm pointing out this problem here with what you're telling me.
So I would say that the difference is that if you have a aristocratic culture in which your match is selected on eugenic reasons, so they don't even care if you meet, then that's one
Okay.
way to do eugenics. Now, if you're in a social order where you have free choice mating, so it's up to you to find somebody, then the best eugenic signal is and I know you're saying, well, you're sexually attracted to all kinds of people, and
Yeah.
yeah, you are. But I'm saying like the kind of person like I do like this is goes to the point of people attacking me for trying to belittle monogamy or go against monogamy or something. I I'm still a romantic in the sense that there are certain people who have certain idiosyncratic effects on others. Now, it's not everyone's got a soulmate because there's this rigid hierarchy, but once you're like, these are the women that I like, there will be a woman among that group who resonates with you more than the others. And so that's the eugenic tell. That's the thing that's like, that's the person you should be having the children with.
I don't, why would I believe that? Why would I believe that? I think that I think there's a case that women have highly eugenic sexual preferences. I think there's a case for that. Like they always go for the smart guy, the guy with the muscles, the guy with the money, and those are all eugenic qualities. But men's sexual desire is incredibly unpredictable. It largely hinges on fertility, right? So you will as a man, if you walk into a room and you see a 35-year-old, like eugenic princess, like super genius, and that she is sitting next to a 21-year-old bimbo, you're likely going to, like, your hormones are going to go for the not necessarily dysgenic, but the non-eugenic bimbo. I don't trust men's base sexual desire to have any kind of genetic correlation. Uh,
But, but that's because you're using sexual desire in a purely physical sense. You're not using it in like a or like a cognitive or mental sense of like so this is why I always
I
like
guess
to
I guess I could imagine, like, if you said, like, if you the soulmate will be the eugenic match, is what you're saying.
yes, but not in the way that term's usually used. So there's a sexual charge that a man has with all kinds of women. There's an erotic charge that he only has with a few, and that's the distinction. So in other words, yeah, you're right. There's all kinds of women you'd like to have sex with, but there's very few women you'd want to have like a romantic affair with in the sort of aestheticized sense of this is like this is like an erotic um like episode, or this is like a grand
Hmm.
passion or something, and and so there is that distinction. I mean, everyone has those distinctions. Like, sure, I'll have sex with her, fine, whatever. And then there's the I actually have like mental change because of this affair. I actually have I feel like sort of in a transcendent state because of this affair. And those people exist for everyone. So,
But
so
if,
it's
if this were the case, then free love societies would be eugenic.
no,
And
no,
tradition. Well, why? That's what you're stipulating, essentially, right?
no, I'm not, because in other words, if there's no sanction to be like you're locked into someone, then there's actually no incentive for anyone to really seek that out. In other words, you can get a lot of mileage and a lot of satisfaction from just monkey branching, which is what people do now. So in
Yeah,
other words, you're
that's
like,
because this stuff that we're describing, these feelings of, limerence are incredibly unreliable, which is why we didn't plan marriages around them before, like, 1950 or whatever, or 1930.
well, but we've had all of Western history has a long, I mean, there's all kinds of literature, there's all kinds of cultural, like, in fact, it's the holy grail of culture, which is the grand affair, the grand romantic connection, you know? So this is
But these
very
were
different.
not procreative, though. Like,
Well, because
Dante and Beatrice weren't. I mean, Dante had children with his wife. He saw Beatrice 2 times.
well, she didn't.
Guinevere and Lancelot, that's like another example of this, grand affair. No children from that issue. Guinevere was barren. Tristan and Isolde, they both die. Romeo and Juliet, they both die. Every time you encounter this in fiction, it is a non-procreative thing. And need I say, like, most if, like, actual history, the societies that are eugenic tightly control procreation behind arranged marriages. They would be deeply suspicious of this idea that the best marriages are concocted by I mean, I know what kind of what they would call limerence, right? But I mean, we would kind of deep romantic love. I mean, they'd be highly suspicious of that, wouldn't they? I think you might be frozen. I can hear you, so there you're coming back.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So I have an answer for this too, which is basically like social custom can do a lot here, which is you're right that in a sort of like standard social order, all eroticism is transgressive. So in other words, you basically are like, you want the affair that you shouldn't have, you want the doomed youthful passion that's you shouldn't have. Like the allure of the erotic in a situation where you have very definite social expectations for who you marry and for what you're trying to do, which is be stable into middle age. The definition of the erotic is transgressive. But there have been historical societies, especially nascent aristocratic ones, that solved this problem.
Which
And so
ones?
ancient Sparta, for instance.
Okay,
So,
so we're going way back.
well, we're going way back, yeah. But there were versions of this in medieval Italy where
Which ones?
so I'm not going to get the families right, but there was a practice in
Almost
Florida.
all families in Italy practiced arranged marriage, as far as I'm concerned.
They did, but what they did, what a few of them did was they would basically create a ritual out of it. So in other words, it's like if you want X to marry Y, you can just jam it and make it work by social pressure, and that's been the norm. But what you can also do is you can essentially design a transgressive ritual around it. And that's what the Spartans did. That's the one I'm most familiar with, though there's a tradition of this in a lot of cultures, which is
How
sort
is
of
it?
like
Can I ask a question here? How is it transgressive if it is for instance, so I'm guessing, I think I read your article about the Spartan thing, that there was this kind of like pattern of like shotgun weddings that are part of the courtship activity, what we would call shotgun weddings. If you go to Italian families, I don't know which ones you're referring to, but what I'm going to assume is that this is an extended courtship ritual, not so dissimilar from the Georgian wedding season that we talk endlessly about in our circles. This is adults planning things to essentially help young people speed date, to borrow modern parlance, towards the direction of marriage. But these things are religious rituals. They have very formalized forms, and if you break them at all, you're going to get executed or shunned, or your life is over. So I feel like if we call these transgressive, we're really abusing the words transgressive. These things are the opposite of transgressive. They're ceremonialized.
So when you talk about like religious courtship customs, yes. When you talk about something
Which I
like you
think
saw,
is what Sparta was.
well, you could call it that, but in other words, there was real penalties for I'll
Yeah,
just
there are real
explain.
penalties for breaking it, right?
Well, no, there were real penalties for doing what was expected and not succeeding. Let me
Okay,
just
fair
explain.
enough.
So like in Sparta, what would happen? And this is all according to Plutarch, and some people call
Yeah.
him a lot,
Uh,
but I believe
I
him.
like this is why I like going for more recent examples, because we know about the Spartans comes from Athenians, and so they're not even telling their own story, and so this stuff feels highly
Well,
embellished.
so
This if this isn't going on in Athens and in Rome, which are the two like ancient societies that we know from their own accounts, then I start kind of like wondering if I'm hearing like Athenian propaganda or whatever, right?
well, that's fair. But even regardless of if it actually happened, I think it's a great idea. So, so the
How
idea
do we
was,
know it works, right? That's the thing. Like the problem is that when people try doing things like this, well, I mean, like if it's like Georgian wedding season, then we know it works, right? We know stuff like that works, right? um what we don't what has consistently not worked is sexual free-for-all, and then like let's force everyone to get married after the sexual free-for-all. Whenever we've tried that, it hasn't worked in recorded history. In any times where we've had actually reliable narrators record things like that, it's never worked outside of like accounts from unfriendly historians about a society that they were literally at war with. uh Sexual free for all, and then you get married afterwards. We tried this in the 60s. We tried this in various communes in the 19th century. They tried this in various communes in France in the 18th century. Never works. Never works, because the relationships that you build in those sexual free for alls are highly unstable. And once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's like, okay, so it's free love now, but then the consequences necessarily have to be locked down. Okay, everyone likes this idea that we're going to just let the hormones do the talking in this 1 year, right? But like, so let's say you're 25, so at age 25, you let the hormones do the talking, like that plans out who you mate with, right? But you're not thinking that at age 26, 27, 28, all the way up to when you're 76, your hormones don't get to do the talking. In fact, they're heavily suppressed. And what I think people have found is that letting sexual chaos create marriages rather than people trying to make matches and being prudent just works a lot less well.
that's all absolutely correct. But what if I suggested this model? So, and this would require, yeah, a total suspension of a free choice sex market. It would require
Okay.
essentially, I guess you'd call it a totalitarian control of laws and customs. But this model where you basically have controlled courtship, not unlike what you see in the churches, right? So you basically have adults that try to get young people to come together and talk and find the person.
Yeah, that's traditional,
And
yes.
right, right. So that's what you start with, right? And like maybe you have like a festival in the spring or something where this goes on in particular.
Where
I
what
think
goes on?
where this controlled courtship where you're intentionally
Oh,
bringing
okay.
super
Okay, yeah.
young people together.
Controlled courtship. Okay. Not sexual free for all for a night.
Nope, nope,
Okay.
you'll punish severely if you
Okay,
transgress
excellent.
it. So there's
Excellent.
a huge, yep. So there's a huge control. No sexual no overt, like no sexual contact, but you're trying to get people to find that person. Then when the festival ends, the expectation is the man's got to take her away. And so she goes back to her parents' house or wherever. And what he's supposed to do is he's supposed to run in and nab her. I'm not even kidding. And if he gets caught, he gets punished. If he gets caught, he gets punished for burglary. He gets punished for whatever you want to lay it on. If he doesn't get caught and he gets her, then his job is to have sex with her until she's pregnant, at which point the marriage is legitimate.
Okay, I mean, we're just taking the standard trad model and then adding this kind of like dangerous game thing at the end. Or like,
because,
I mean,
well, you say that's arbitrary.
like, you know, you're going to get charged with sexual assault if you accidentally trip his Briggs security alarm, right? Like if he has extra good security on his house, then you're going to go away for 25 years.
Well, so this is why, and I know you're like, this is so far back, it's not even, there's not even a point. And I'd have to think about maybe ways to make it creative.
I'm just trying to figure out what you're getting at, right? I think this whole Spartan thing is, you know, if you want to have a guy like lift a bunch of weights to prove that he's worthy, or, you know, run a mile or whatnot, or
because if you want real passion, you have to have, like, it has to feel transgressive. This is like, this is why
why?
Because that's just what human nature is. You have to feel
to feel a passion, yeah. But this idea that the ordinary operation of most occasion, like passion, is a function of like the risk of death, and some very few people will have this like romance novel level of like passion in their relationships. Like,
why not construct the social customs to where they can? That's
because then you are essentially going to destroy your society's ability to reproduce. If you're saying we're not going to have any children until you can concoct a situation that is like, you know, hormonally passionate, most people will not reproduce.
Well, it would have to begin, I think, in sort of like a nation subculture. So yeah, I mean, you're right that there's no question of applying any of what I'm saying is, you know, at scale. But basically what you do is you'd say our customs have respect for the need for all sexual passion to feel transgressive, which it is. In other words, like
that's a contradiction in my mind. You're saying required transgression by law is not transgression.
No, because if you put a roadblock where you say if you fail in success,
okay, you mean an ordained contest with large negative consequences. So we need to put.
So if you fail in doing this thing that we expect you to do, you'll be punished.
Okay, great. So you don't want transgression. What you want is a state instituted roadblock and hurdle in front of mating. That's fine. That would definitely, you know, increase the passion of marriage. It might or it might not. At no point do I consider that transgressive definitionally. That's just saying that it's a required hurdle in front of marriage.
Well, okay, so you don't like the word I used, but there, in other words,
required transgression or instituted transgression is an oxymoron.
I think the term is fine. I think it is an oxymoron. I think it's a reflection of the fact that you want certain behaviors to happen in your society that you will not openly condone. And that's completely remote from egalitarian law. No legal system the last couple hundred years has ever thought that way. But we have
we're going to legalize things that we want.
No, we're going to basically say we don't condone the thing we expect you to do.
Well, that's modern dating. Right.
Well, no, anything's what
In
isn't a no.
modern college hookups are like all the sex that people naturally have is rape because there's not a yes at every single step of the way. I mean, we constructed that there. It doesn't feel particularly transgressive. I mean, I guess you are transgressing it, right?
No, and I think in that case, there's a bit of a what's going on there is I mean, it's basically moralism at odds with instinct, which is the whole problem, I think, of the vitalist Christian divide, which is, you know, there are certain behaviors that we want you to do, preferably for society. There are
Hmm.
certain instincts that you have that everyone has that they want to do specifically because they are not preferable for society. So there's this longing for real transgression. So I want to commit adultery, I want to have an affair, I want to, do something that, I want to do something that makes me feel naughty. And everyone has that to a degree of on
Yeah.
some level, you know. And so what modern legal systems say is, well, and it's like adultery used to be a crime in a lot of places, and it still is in a lot of the world. It's not in the West anymore. Which I think actually, well,
Well,
I
I guess what I'm struggling with is this, this idea. And I mean, it seems like you want to institutionalize transgression, and that I dispute that. I think that is a self-defeating thing. I think that if you say that you can only get married if you transgress this law, wink wink nudge nudge, because most people get married in our society and most people transgress this law. I mean, people are smart. Like they're not stupid. Like anybody can read in between the lines and see that this law is designed to be broken. I mean, it feels kind of like the liberal conceit where like we totally take human behavior and like put it into the law and then make the law above the law and all that stuff. I just don't believe in that, right? Like if you want transgression, then look, I mean, if you want to make normal human behavior, if you want to legalize human reproduction, you can do that, but that will result in the eventual death of your society.
but that's not what I want to do. It's in other words, I'm basically creating a situation where the 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 men have to have a risk to get to get a woman, which
Hmm.
is appealing both to the man if he's hormonally wired properly, and it's especially doubly appealing to the woman because there's this sense of like, okay, there's some danger involved in getting me. It's not like, there's like this, he wants me this bad that he's going to risk something to get me. And
Sure.
so
I
so
mean,
you
you could have. I mean, it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask like some extraordinary feat before marriage, right?
right. So that's what I mean by like I use the term like an agon ritual. So like that's basically where like the famous one is in Herodotus with Hippocleides, where the guy says, "Well, you have to win an athletic contest if you want my daughter, right?"
Okay. Yeah.
And the athletic contest is legitimately lethal. I mean, you gotta do chariot races and things, and you're like, well, okay, at scale, this doesn't work. Obviously not.
Yeah,
But
it would not work at scale. I mean, at least that's coherent. Like a lethal athletic competition as a cost of a man to propose to a daughter is not that's a coherent idea, and it's something that we don't see it formally in Christian civilization, but you see it through the requirement of military service, which is kind of like that. And I mean that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable thing. I think that you'd have a hard time scaling it up, certainly.
oh, you'd have an
And
immensely hard time, which is
and
which
but
is why you have.
what would that actually mean practically, like for our society?
Well, so I'm not saying that's what you do. I'm saying that you would have a specific custom, and it would have to begin in a subculture, but you'd have a custom where a man, it's like I guess one of the terms for it is mock bride capture, except there are
Mm.
actual consequences if you're caught. So,
I mean,
so if
first
you
of all, this would only work if we had a custom that completely prohibited premarital sex. That's the only way this kind of formalized, like, lethal contest to get married would ever fly. Like, no guy is gonna, like, take a, like, 10% chance of dying to get a woman that he's known for 3 days when he can just go out and, get casual sex. So, like, we're talking past that barrier here. The
Well,
total reinstitution of all previous sexual norms would be required for this contest even to begin to make sense.
Well, so we're talking about a self-imposed discipline on a subculture. So what I mean by that is that,
yeah, but you have to. This is a lethal contest. You have to enforce this.
No, but forget the lethal go back to the thing I said about the Spartan custom, which is it wasn't a lethal contest. It
Well,
was.
I mean, it kind of was.
Well, they wouldn't kill
You said
you,
that.
but
Well, they exile you, which would result
no,
in.
they wouldn't even exile you. They beat you with birchwood, is what they do. So you'd get whipped, and you'd basically suffer social humiliation because you were trying to take the girl you wanted to marry from her father's house, and you got caught.
Okay, but it's okay. Some extreme punishment is going to pertain to this courtship ritual. So, like, you're going to have to go in and risk extreme punishment to get this girl. That it only flies in a world where sexual propriety is enforced. If it's not, then it just feels stupid. Like, you're going to get beaten by sticks and, like, lose a week of work, to get this girl.
Well,
when like, you could just participate in ordinary life. Or
so you asked me in the broadest possible terms. You said, what alternate social formation from traditional marriage is possible? That was the question you gave me on Substack.
Well,
and this is my in a vacuum answer, which is you have to, and it's not feasible, as you said. It's not even remotely feasible. It's not even remotely feasible for a group of people that wanted to do it, because they would be violating laws, the universal egalitarian law code. So this is in a vacuum, this is what I would encourage. And so now you're asking a practical question of,
well, I'll put it this way to respond to that thing. Like, my problem is that what you describe as transgressive to norms actually is more norms than what Christians believe in. You want the Christian norms, and then you want more norms on top of those Christian norms to enforce a sense of vitalism. And, so for me, I think the confusion comes is, like, the way you're describing it is like you're tearing things down. But what really is, you want more restrictions on sexual courtship than even traditional Christians in our society would want. Do you want those and additional ones?
Ideally, yes.
Okay, fair enough. And fair enough, but yeah.
But now you're asking the practical question of, what do we do now?
Well, I haven't got the practical question yet, but I'm just saying, in the abstract, what you're imagining is a society that has more customs than the old Christian world had when it came to dating and courtship.
Right. And crucial to all of this is that you're keeping boys and girls separate. So in other words, nothing is co-ed. So in Sparta, nothing was co-ed. So like it was the men lived in the barracks when they were 7, and the women lived in the homes, and like they might pass in the agora or something, but that was it. There was no going to school together. There was no hanging out. And the Spartans intentionally did that. And you say, well, that's a huge breach of freedom and free choice, whatever.
I wouldn't say that, but yeah, liberals would.
The Spartans intentionally did that because they basically, wanted hormonal drive to be channeled into war in the case of the men. And they were basically making a pressure cooker, which is that you want this so bad, and we're going to give you the opportunity to get it, but only if you jump over this hurdle, which would have you being punished. So the whole custom was designed, one, to maximize, like, the basis of pure eugenic breeding is the best men with the best women at the best time in the best way. And so, like, what that is you get the hormones at hothouse levels by keeping them apart. then you let them meet in a very controlled environment where they can't do anything. And then you say, all right, you want to do something, go for it. And if you can't make it happen, then you're punished. And
But the
basically,
examples we have of this are built on top of pre-existing traditional norms. Like that's the necessary substrate to this.
yeah, I mean, you'd have to be. This is why I'm baffled by some of the response I got, which is that I'm encouraging polygamy or rampant bacchanals or something. Like my goal is to essentially create a new ruling class, which is a which is a massive statement and a massive undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you actually need far more discipline than even the Christian, like traditional Christian discipline or customs would impose. And this is why, if you look at like the the most successful pagan aristocracies, they had far more rigid control over rampant sexual behavior than even the Christians did.
Okay.
So in a way, I'm even more
I mean, I think we
radical.
really got thrown off by the whole transgression word, which implies the
Well,
exact opposite motion. But
yeah,
look, I'm not my commenters, so I'm just, my criticism was very much focused on the practical. Like I appreciate the fact that in an ideal sense, before we get to the practical, it would be great that in addition to ordinary Christian sexual norms, we also had men having to perform some kind of feat or risk for their women that would definitely improve things. I guess the reason why I don't make it a large part of the things that I talk about is we are so far away from that, that like I said, I would have to reestablish all the ordinary sexual norms before that even became remotely plausible.
right, absolutely. So in my vacuum, I'm the lawgiver for some balkanized apocalyptic state. This is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. But in the real world, the suggestion that I've made, which is that you basically make an assessment of yourself, an honest assessment of yourself, your social class, your history, what you can actually get, and you take on an aristocratic perspective of primarily being concerned with the lineage. So in other words, you're no longer looking for.
Can you hold up there? So if you do an honest assessment of your social class, before you go on, 99% of the people will not be aristocrats, right?
Well,
So if
nobody's.
you do the honest assessment, why would you take an aristocratic perspective if you have honestly assessed yourself to not be an aristocrat?
Because you're banking on the idea that your lineage might be.
Okay.
But you're
So
not. You're not going to be.
regardless of what we are, we're assuming that we are the new. That's actually, I like that. So pardon me. I was just trying to clarify. Please
Yeah.
proceed.
So I'm not saying, I mean, it's all LARP. And I've been the first to say everything I
Mhm.
say is aristocratic LARP. I'm a bartender. So like the the thing I'm saying though is that you can think the way historical aristocracies thought, even from your lowly position. And so what that primarily means is saying, I am choosing a woman for lineage. I'm not choosing her because we're best friends and we have the same astrological sign and we have so much fun together, and like the, most people will still
Can
want.
I ask a question? Because I just trying to figure out what you mean, because I thought previously you said that it was you're choosing kind of like on hormonal, like soulmate kind of grounds. And now you're saying that you're choosing based on lineage. So you're assuming that those things are incredibly well correlated or practically almost 100% correlated.
Yeah, I am assuming that.
Okay. That to me would be a little, well, I'm not going to mince words. That to me is highly questionable. You know,
Well, so I won't make it as like a hard scientific claim, but what I'm saying is that the like having a rush of act of real passion for someone is a lot more important than like financial considerations. You're in the lumpen class anyway. What do you care? Like it's more important than financial considerations.
Well,
It's more important than what? No,
it's
it's more important
statistical,
than,
right? Statistically, high finances correlates with good genes, like everything else we're
well,
talking about, right?
I I don't think it correlates with high intelligence genes. It doesn't
It
necessarily
does,
correlate.
yes.
So, I
High
mean,
intelligence genes will correlate with good physical genes as well. They group together.
yes, they do, but they like the okay. Okay. Let me just back up. I mean, let's keep it for
Okay.
a moment on the type
Yeah,
of men I'm talking
sure.
about, which is so you're talking like, okay, if you did the right bourgeois thing in your 20s and you have some social charisma and you're not a dud and you
Mhm.
make, you know, half a million a year, yeah, you know, obviously that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of people who have sunk below the middle class.
Okay.
And there's a lot of these men, and they might be peripherally middle class. They might work like in a bank, or they might work in, I don't know, some kind of sales, low level sales or something. Like the point is they got a degree in a lot of cases, and they're not living up to the promise that the degree had 2 generations ago, right?
We're all in
So,
that situation, yes.
right. So, like, I can't tell you how many guys I know who have a degree and they're working in service. This is
Mhm.
huge population of people. So that's who I'm talking to. And I'm saying, let's you look at your class realistically, which is this is where you are. Like, I'm not saying you can't make it big as an entrepreneur or whatever, but right now you're in the service class, your youth is frittering away. You aren't going to now make the calculation of who you marry based entirely on preferential lineage. And now you ask the question, who do you actually have? Because you can't get the kind of woman you just talked about. You can't get uh, the highly intelligent woman who, you know, has a great career going for herself. You can't get the extremely beautiful women who obviously go for higher status. What you can get is the BPD art hoe, and
Uh,
that's usually
well, I mean, that by your construction, that's the only option available to you, right? By
no,
your construction.
that's by no
Uh,
means the only option available. You can go for, I mean, you can go for like a obese woman. You can go for some insecure women in the middle class who are just looking for a guy. Like, there's other options, you know. Like, and that sounds all very pejorative, but what I'm basically saying is, why
I
not
mean,
marry the?
it's well, I would need to know what your options are. If
Well, okay,
I
so
were
put
a young
yourself,
guy right now,
yeah,
and
put
if I
yourself
were
in the,
honest together, put together, like, you know, first of all, I have not been in the dating market for 10 years. I've been married for 10 years, right? But I specifically tried to steer away from highly neurotic women. In fact, I broke a bunch of relationships that could have ended up in marriage, not a small part because I sense that there is a high level of neuroticism in the women. So I would highly pick against neuroticism because I knew that I had ambitions to get things done. And if I didn't have a woman who was aligned with my objectives, I had seen so many men destroyed by women who turned on them against their interests. And that has destroyed, and you have to be really good to survive a woman who's turned against you with all of the things that society gives to them. So, you know, if I were a guy in the present order, I would look for low neuroticism and then high in all other good traits. I think it's really like we're kind of overthinking this. I think that just bad things are bad and good things are good. If you want a woman that is like, first of all, I mean, let's be honest, most of the eugenic selection does not go on in the selection of women, it goes on in the selection of men. Like that's the majority of eugenic selection. And so like this
that's
picking the
very,
woman to be eugenic is kind of a weird question to begin with, right? But if that was the thing that was going on, right, you would just pick the qualities. You know, we live in an information age. You don't need to use these weird proxies of cluster B personalities that have known horrific downsides for you and stack risk. You know, portfolio construction. And here's the thing, what I would tell young guys is you want to take risks when you're young, but you don't want to take dumb risks, because your appetite for risk is not unlimited, right? So if you are dealing with the BPD girl who's constantly blowing up your life, you're taking less risks in your career. You're taking less risks trying to take power, because all your energy is constantly dealing with this woman who's in the process of blowing up your life repeatedly. And so I would absolutely steer away from that. Now, like, look, if your option is the BPD girl who loves you, or just a bunch of, I could come up with people who are worse than some person, a highly neurotic woman who might have a cluster B personality trait here or there, but other than that, she's good on all other fronts. Yeah, I could definitely come up with worse women than that. But at least in the selection that men like me had, and most middle class men I think still do have, that cluster B personality traits not something that I'd pick for, because your ability to consume risk is not unlimited, and I want my my risk to be focused on actually getting things done, and not dealing with women exploding on me because they caught the wrong meme on a group chat.
Well, so there's an element of risk tolerance in it, and so if somebody makes that risk calculation and says, "Okay, I'm not dealing with it," then so be it. But I don't know the stats on this, but is it really true that, like, I guess I call it the service class has far higher levels of divorce than the professional middle class at this point?
I don't know. I do know that divorce is largely a middle class phenomenon, doesn't hit the upper class as much. That's been true for 30 or 40 years.
Right.
I don't know how it pertains to subdivisions of that class, though, unfortunately.
Well, so because central to everything I say is this division of the old, and I use this term somewhat ironically, respectable middle class, and I guess you call it the bohemian class, which is all these people of sons and daughters of formerly professional middle class who are not going to be as rich
And
as
the bohemian class is sterile. Like, they're the least procreative class you can imagine, is like the formerly middle class girl that has fallen from the middle class to a bohemian lifestyle. That is on the stats. That is where you're seeing that.
Yeah, because nobody will marry her because she developed psychological problems. And so I'm saying, go
But
marry her.
you don't think that, but you think that this is an undervalued asset, and I think that, like, if
I'm
that's your
making,
only option,
well, right,
I'm
but
not saying that that's.
I'm making the contention that given all you can do, that is absolutely 100% the pretty BBD art ho is 100% your best eugenic
Okay,
option.
but here's the thing, though, Derek. I'm pretty sure I know, like, these, like, daughters of upper class men that went to college and got an education, that used to be a highly fertile class. Do you know what's correlated with their extreme drop in fertility? It's been ideological. This class of women has glommed onto feminism and progressivism. And you can see this in statistics. I don't know the statistics about divorce among the service class, but you can absolutely see the statistic. You can see the desire for children in this class of women go from very high to rock bottom low in the last 15 years in particular. This just jumps right out from the statistics if you look at it on the page. So, when you target this class of women, you're targeting the very class of women that has developed ideological reasons to not want children.
So I'll make the blatantly controversial statement that any woman who has a hard ideology doesn't have any ideology but biology. So what I mean by
Okay,
that is,
so let's take the most BPD art hosts I know are hard feminists. So what does that mean in the context
yeah,
of
and,
those
and the
people?
year before they were Wiccan, and the year before they were Buddhist, and
They all
the
have, yeah, but their core ideology and their attitudes do not change. You
Well,
know,
because
they go through
because
fads, right? Like now they're all Palestinian activists. Before that, they were all BLM activists. Before that, they were all global warming activists. But that their attitudes generally towards men and family have remained remarkably consistent.
so I'll push back a little on this idea that BPD is absolutely associated with leftism. Which is, if you go to like a dive bar in Tennessee, you get, like, redneck type girls with all, tattooed up just like the lefty ones,
Mm.
and some of them are openly racist, and they all have the same psychological problems. So I push back a little on this idea that having a cluster B disorder is instantly associated with stated feminism or asserted leftist politics. And I would say, even if there's a correlation there, the correlation really doesn't matter, because these people don't have a consistent ideological center. They don't even have a centered self. So what they're
Well, but
basically
they
want.
think they do, right? Most feminists don't have a consistent ideological center, but that doesn't mean they will still be problem. Like if I go to Berkeley, which just down the way here, right? Like none of those women have consistent ideological centers, but that consistent thing is doing a lot of work for you. You will feel the force of that ideological center being brought against you if you were to develop a relationship with these women.
Well, so I would maintain you'd have a better chance of altering the opinions of a radically feminist BPD girl than a mainstream shit lib middle class woman.
That is the opposite of my experience, and that's the opposite for most of the experiences that I have seen. Is this something that you've seen happen a lot? This is
Yeah. So a lot
very
of again, we're just sort of exchanging anecdotal experience, which who
it's
knows how
really,
reliable.
if you just
But
encounter like a standard woman who just like watches mainstream
but
movies, they don't
have
care
you,
about politics. They'll just adopt whatever your politics is. If you go to one of these women who's like, in one of these group chats that's like, super ideological, they'll suss out anytime you try to introduce a contrary opinion, and they'll use it against you. And their friend, and worse than that, their friends will suss you out and try to turn them against you.
Okay, so this gets back. I feel like you're using BPD as basically a shorthand for an unpleasant woman, or as you said, a neurotic woman.
Yeah, I'm using it for high neurotic. I mean, look, I it's a diagnosable condition, but the literature correlates this with highly neurotic and highly disagreeable women. That's what it's correlated with in the DSM and stuff like that. I mean, it's not just that, right? It's more psychological qualities, but insofar as it's a type, it's highly neurotic and highly disagreeable.
Well, so yeah, the neurotic. I mean, I don't want to get in casuistry with this again, but I would prefer the term disinhibited emotional palate as opposed to neurotic, because you can be like a lot of professional middle class people are neurotic, like neurotic in the sense
Yeah,
of they're constantly anxious, they're constantly like
yeah.
burdened by stress, but they're
Hmm.
not extravagantly emotional. So calling a beat, like using that term as a cover for, or as like a defining feature of a someone with a cluster B personality disorder, I don't think is helpful. And if the psychiatrists do it, then yeah, I'm going against them, because
Well,
neurotic.
I think maybe language is holding us back. What you're saying is that you want a woman who's high in openness. That's what you're saying, right? I just don't think that there's any relationship between high trait openness and what we typically associate with cluster B personalities. If anything, I would imagine that cluster B personality traits might make you less open.
But even that term,
I,
that's a Rorschach term, because openness, like you're like openness to like being like, are you saying being
it's a big
convenient?
five personality trait openness. This
Well, I
is
get that, but I'm not familiar with the big five.
well, the reason why we use it is that on a variety of psychological tests, you can see these, like everyone kind of clusters into the same category based on these personality traits. So like people who do high openness stuff here will also behave in a similar way in all these other tests, right? So these are emergent properties that you see from a variety of psychology. That's why people like them so much, right? And that's why they get used a lot, right? Because they are emergently observable when you look at a variety of human behaviors. Look, I'll agree with you that a highly open woman would be a good selection. I would consider that to be an asset. So if we use
Okay,
that language, then maybe we could agree on that.
This word openness, I'm not understanding. Is it showing openness to be willing to sleep in the woods? Like that's
Yes.
okay. Who's
It's
more
like
likely to
a
do that?
new experience, and how willing are you to try a new experience or reject a new experience is what openness
Okay,
stands in for.
I genuinely don't understand how we can say like BPDs aren't open because they do things that
They're
no other girl would do. So
they're
that's
open, but the problem is with the BPD thing is they're highly open and highly closed at different times. BPD, the condition, has no correlation because they're simultaneously highly open and highly closed depending on the condition. So one day she'll be highly open, right? She'll be, so let's try this new thing. Like she's breaking white on you, right? Like the relationship just started. Let's go sleep in the woods, right? And it's like, oh yeah, of course, let's go do that, right? But then like 2 weeks pass and like her personality changes and you're like, oh, hey, let's try a new restaurant. And she'll be like, how dare you? How dare you? Right? How dare you change my restaurant that I always go to? That's the BPD thing. She will be highly open and highly closed. And so saying like, oh, well, these BPD women, they're highly open because they're open to some things, yes, but then
Okay.
they'll be highly closed when the situation changes
And
the next time.
we can't use that word. We have to use. This is why I just say disinhibited. So just say
It's not.
like, but it's an extreme range of emotion is what it is. So it's not she's neurotic and
She's not
open.
saying yes to the weird thing you want to do because she's just generally open to doing weird things because people suggest them. She's saying yes to that because she's having a certain reaction to you psychologically that breaks white on your particular thing. If that changes, she will go from saying yes all the time to saying no all the time. So she's not disinhibited. Like she's not generally disinhibited. She's not generally somebody who takes a lot of risks. It's just that in this phase of the pattern, she has a very, very low risk tolerance.
Okay. I mean, so you're basically just talking about cyclical emotional and personal qualities, which
Yes. And I'm saying that, look, I mean, like if we just say like you want someone that's high openness and highly disinhibited, that's kind of good. That's kind of good for women. I think that, I would look for a lot of other things, but openness tends to be, I think, a good quality in mates, generally speaking. I think it would correlate with agreeableness too, also, right? And that's another thing is that I would want, if I had my druthers, I would want to pick a woman who is highly agreeable.
well, so I mean, I guess maybe this is me romantically posturing, but the young men today, they don't have a war to go to unless, I mean, they have one, but it's not worth it. They don't have a
Yeah, getting
frontier.
words.
So make a woman your war. Like I like the thing is like it goes back to the comment I said, which is that this level of like sexual extravagance comes with a massive price tag because anything in like you don't get anything for free, in nature. And so
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like, am I thought we were choosing, right? Like,
well, we're the downwardly mobile chud who's looking at what he can get. And
okay,
so
look, if BPD is one of the costs you're paying for an otherwise astounding woman, then maybe she has something to balance it out, right?
well, but
But I say
you're
all things equal, it's not what you want.
okay. Well, I think this is for that specific person that we've been talking about. I would say your chance of getting a really good looking woman basically means she's going to have psychological problems. So like,
but there's actually an interesting. You said make the woman your war. I disagree with that. I think you should make the war your war. I think you should make politics your war. I think you should make your career your war. I would rather have. I mean, why are we wasting all of this energy on wrangling women if we have an option of actually using that energy to do epic things? And either get a woman that's compatible with that mission of conquest, or do your conquest first and then come back and figure out the whole woman thing after you've already fought your war.
so that's fair. I think it's a skill set that transfers. So in other words, if you can wrangle a BPD girl, you're probably the kind of person that can fight a revolution. And so it's like, no, I'm not even kidding. Like, it's the same thing. It's like you will feel rushes of adrenaline and you will feel in mortal danger, and is that not a war? Like, so
I've
you're
known people who've wrangled BPD women and they haven't done any revolutions.
Well, I mean, maybe they got burned out, but if you don't get burned out, and you have a valuable skill set you've got in the back burner. So, like,
isn't it kind of just like, I mean, doesn't it feel kind of like, well, I'm going to break my own leg because if I can survive breaking my leg, then like I can survive anything, like, well, I mean, sure, I admire that, but couldn't you do anything else that's hard and challenging that would make you stronger? Why couldn't you train for a marathon? Why couldn't you learn a language? Why couldn't you climb Mount Everest? Why couldn't you like try to build a company? Why couldn't you do anything that had like substantial things at the other end, rather than spend all of this effort on funneling time and energy to this bottomless pit that is, the changing moods of a woman?
Maybe it takes a specific type. I don't know, but I would say that, again, it goes back to this. Think about your lineage. So if you're a downwardly mobile guy and you're basically like, I've been priced out of the girls that I thought I would be able to marry because I'm not in the middle class, then you're like, well, just find anyone, and then focus on something else. Whereas I would say, no, go for the emotionally extravagant one and have her children. That's what I'm saying.
Well, have her. That you'd have to marry her at minimally to get that, because most women, you're not going to accidentally have a child with a modern woman. Like these women are on three. That's all to be saying. You're not going to accidentally have like a child with these women. They're all on 3 forms of birth control. They all have, they make regular trips to Planned Parenthood. But I mean, I don't know. Have you seen the movie Gone Girl, perchance?
No.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. It's about a BPD woman. And, Ben Affleck, I did a podcast with Jay Burden on that movie. And the guy does succeed at wrangling her, but she basically has a gun to his head the entire time, for the rest of his life. And the end of the movie is like, okay, I'm just going to spend the rest of my life with this ticking time bomb next to me. Hoping that I get on the right side of this. I don't know. I mean, I guess why wouldn't, I mean, you're doing like organization too, just to kind of bring this down. So if we would be going for almost 2 hours, and usually I like to keep these things around 2 hours, like why, can I ask a question? I've heard this from Walt Bismarck and you too. And it's not just you. There's a lot of people on Substack that think in your direction. And this is what kind of gets me. There is this incredible focus on women. And what if, crazy thought, we just focused on accomplishing objectives and conquering and building and constructing institutions? And there's a lot of work that we're doing in the organizations that I'm participating in, a lot of opportunities there. They don't pay, but they definitely provide a struggle. Why couldn't we do that and then let the woman question take care of itself afterwards? Because I have found that once I had a mission and an aligning morality and a vision of the good, that the woman question kind of took care of itself. when last time I was talking to Walt Bismarck, I fed him just this example and we talked about it for like 3 hours, right? But I do kind of want to hit you with that again, because this has always been the disconnect between me and you, and me and him is this going to men who have not had any victories yet and say, well, you need to directly wrangle with the woman question. My feeling is the exact opposite. My feeling is fight for a cause, figure out who you are, build something. It might not be the biggest thing in the world, but fight the fights that you can, do the adventures. And then the woman thing kind of like comes in afterwards.
So yeah, you mentioned my organizing. I have a group of young men, and what I'll say is there's like when you're meeting with young men, women don't exist. But the like you're doing your thing, you're trying to get something going, and you don't talk about them, and it is a very refreshing change. And I basically in my group, we never talk about women ever. It doesn't even come up, and I insist that it doesn't come up. But what I'd say is that like you don't know how much like these guys in their 20s, especially the chuds and especially the terminally online, like I would say maybe 85% literally of what they think about is women.
Yeah, they
It's
do.
well, and so you're like, well, stop doing that. Stop. But it's a thing that can't go away because it's so biologically hardwired. We're in I've used the phrase the oppression of titillation. We're in a social order where this is just bombarded. And so, like, you have to give, like, if you want the kind of motivation that you need to see, and like, you can say, well, wouldn't it motivate them to work in the young group to get the women? I think it's in a tech age, you can't think like that. It's
Well,
like,
I know, but I mean, if you've used the Spartan example. In the ancient world, a celibate mind was considered an aristocratic virtue. I know that for sure. There are lots of men who dedicated themselves to the way of the warrior, the way of the priest, the way of the artist, with vows of temporary or sometimes permanent celibacy. And this was considered a tried and true orientation for young men. And I don't think that young men generally should take permanent vows of celibacy, but I don't see why if we are learning from the Spartans about like mating rituals, why couldn't we try to take that from them as well?
I think because the like the tech world has basically created a situation where like you can be titillated at any time. Literally, you can go and look,
Yeah,
you can watch
you
porn,
can.
you can do whatever you want. Like it's such a massive temptation for a guy in his 20s who is at his testosteronic prime. It's literally like an anchor holding everything down if he is not getting something. And if he's not, so like my group, people come to like a lot of the people that have stuck around, it's because they basically think they can get a girl out of it, and they expect to get a girl out of it, or they expect to be able to improve their social skills. It's not even about the politics. The politics is the woman. Like it's like I'm converting these people to my politics because I'm giving them the social ability to get a woman.
But
So
I don't trust that though. I liked it more when you said you prohibited discussion of women altogether, right? The goal of politics should be victory. Uh, there should be men who are functionally celibate in your political movement, at least if we're following the patterns of other successful movements in history. Uh, I don't think the majority of men should be, but I don't trust a man who's standing by my side because he thinks that, to put it crudely, he's going to get laid. I I feel like if he suddenly did get lucky, then he might not have my back anymore.
well, that's a legitimate concern. And so, but what I would say is that like these sort of like bonds of brotherhood, which very few men have today, you can't build those. Like those are long in building. And what you need is buy-in before you can even start to do that. And so a guy buying into any social group, whether it's a male only group or whatever it is very often thinking of women. And so there's like this albatross on like any sort of an attempt to say, well, I want you motivated for political change. I want you motivated for like some kind of grand cause. And you like, I can tell, and because they say so, like, they're like, I really, really just want to be sexually attracted to women because they haven't bought into that yet. That takes
Mhm.
like time, that takes inculcation, like that takes like you really have to build up a culture, a subculture to get people to buy into that. What they're coming on at the front is, yeah, I want a girl. So I guess I'd leave it like you can't ignore the woman question. Like you have to give them some kind of guidance on what they can do now for it. I don't think you can tell them, look, forget about it, try to forget about it, don't think about it, like, and just focus on like political change. You got to give them some notion of like, look, given your circumstances, here's what you ought to do as far as
Well,
women.
you need to give them good advice, I guess. Yeah, I would try to give them realistic advice from my own life. Um, uh, I, I look, all men want to get married. They all want to have a woman. That's a thing. I guess I am, of the community. I've been doing this for 10 years, and the people that are obsessed with like this game and red pill and women stuff, they tend to fall away very quickly. And the people that are interested in other things like religion and culture and even race, they tend to stay. And and for that reason, I don't really trust the okay, I mean, like, for instance, like, this was back in the day, and I don't want to, speak ill of the dead, but there was this guy called Coach Red Pill, that he was murdered or passed away in Ukraine recently. I don't want to comment on which one. Uh, uh, but he had built his entire career around selling the prospect of, you know, he had built this massive community of sexually frustrated men, but it was a mile wide and it was an inch deep. And when push came to shove, when he was really in trouble, it turned out that he had very few people who genuinely were his friends and allies. And I feel really, really bad what happened to him. But I can't completely disconnect that to this strategy of kind of like selling this message of, the ideology of fixing the dating woes thing. I'm just a little suspicious of that. For all it's worth. But I probably said too much. I don't want to say anything about a guy who's passed away. But um yeah, I mean, we're finishing up. I mean, what do you see as prospects? I think we should end on a note of conciliation. Yeah, I really liked your pieces on Substack, Derek, and our disagreements about the types of women men should prioritize dating, notwithstanding. I really like your work. And what do you? I'll give you this question as like a mode of conciliation. I have been seeking to build bridges between the people who are of a more Christian persuasion and are of a more vitalist persuasion. What do you see as necessary steps to build conciliation between those two camps? And what do you say is like the steps that we should take forward to build positive change in the world?
Well, the second question is a lot easier to answer than the first. I would say the and this, I just say this over and over again. You have, if you are a young man, you have to be meeting in a group of young men.
Mhm.
It is non-negotiable. It is 100% the most important thing you can do. You need to be doing it. And it's like it should have a political focus. Um, that can be somewhat opaque, but you just need to be doing it because there's way too many men who are totally isolated. They don't have any male friends, and like you got to get offline. So that's the answer to the second one, which is that is far and away the most important thing young men have to do: meet in a social group with other young men. As to the Christian vitalist divide, the thing I would say about that is that I think, like, I think, like, because the vitalist position is more like novel, or it projects to be more novel, it often gives an olive branch, or not necessarily an olive. There's people that'll trash Christianity, but like, even like Alamariu's like, well, I respect, like, Jesus was a great man of the West, and that's pretty high praise coming from what he otherwise says about it. And so
Mm.
the the thing I would say is that, like, we can work this out later. Like, if there's like, you just have to realize, like, the most important thing is resisting the democratic regime of the West,
Mm.
which is, and so I really didn't like the fact that I got absolutely plastered by some of these dissident Christians for the post, off your restack, and I don't know any of them, but
Well, I
like
mean,
the
it's Substack. People say things, right? I think
right,
people are just
what surprised me was, like, the venom of it, where not even the venom, the tone, but it was like the idea that these people are as bad, if not worse, than the left. And I wasn't even giving, like, a hard pagan position, which I don't even have.
well, okay.
I
I mean, look, I don't want to, I definitely respect you, and I think that you're a great writer. I will sympathize with the people who are highly frustrated with Nietzschean vitalist stuff, because what happens is that you try to build real Christian communities, real organizations, people who actually have families on the ground. And then you have these people who are like 25 years old. They're not married. They never had kids. They never tried to do anything in the real world. You're not one of them. I need to make that absolutely clear. And the fact that you're not one of those people makes me highly, highly respect your work, even more than the fact that you write well. But 99% of the time from the vitalists, what you get is these vitalists showing up to things that are real. And then they call you cucks, like, because they have some kind of story about how we're going to be like Spartans from the movie 300. And it's totally unrealistic, and it's totally disaligned to anything that's going on in the real world. And so, they're just like shitting on your real world thing because they have some kind of like theory about how, like, in the vacuum it's going to be better. And so I think what happened, since you brought this up, was, and it's not fair that they came after you this way, but what they saw was a pattern of Nietzschean vitalists to indict real world Christian things by comparison to some kind of hypothetical abstract, based reality that exists over the rainbow. And I mean, speaking as somebody who used to be an atheist and became a Christian in the new atheist debates, Christians have dealt with this concern trolling for 15 years right now, and everyone's really, really tired of it. They're really, really tired of being called bad in comparison to some hypothetical idea that doesn't exist yet, or being held to their standards by people who don't follow their morality, which is another thing. Christian concern trollings. Christians are tired of being baited, they're tired of being concern trolled, and they're tired of being criticized from the view from nowhere. And I think unjustly that is the reason why there was a lot of pushback. And that's actually one of the reasons why I had you on today. And I think it's important to understand that you are trying to build in the real world. I mean, and one of the things, the challenges for the Nietzscheans, and I'll put this to you as kind of a final thing: respect what you're doing. I think it's great that you're getting young men together. But one of the big problems that we've had getting people to work in the real world is the fact that it's hard to align people if they don't have a common moral system. And vitalism isn't a moral system. So I think that might be a problem that organizations will have to deal with in the future. Do you have a sight of how you might deal with that, or you know, uh, try to address those problems, or do you see that as more of like a bridge that you're going to cross when you come to it?
I mean, I would say that, you know, one of the things, like, so most of my recruits are Orthodox. That's
Mm,
I recruited in Orthodox churches, and you get it's a LARP, just as an aristocratic LARP is, but you get, like a lot of very strong identification with Crusaders, very strong identification with conquistadors, and these are
mm.
Catholic. They're not even Orthodox like people. Like the Crusaders and conquistadors were Catholics, and like there's a sense of like there absolutely is a vitalist Christianity, and it's not just you know go like be violent and batter the faith. It's basically like a sense of like you have to have a militant attitude to save Western civilization. And so that's the bridge, which is I don't even care. Like I never talk about like Christian theology or like I really don't care. Like what
No,
I care about
I don't saying you do necessarily care. I'm just wondering, do you think that it's
no, no, what I'm
important for
saying,
groups to have a motivating moral system that kind of unifies them?
I think it's more important to have a common enemy, which we do. And as
Mm,
far as the moral system, I really don't see the difference in like if you're gonna say like, well, I I think the like the Christian like the Christian conquest of the world, I think that was very good, or I think that was like those are people to be emulated. I mean, that was Christian. It was motivated in part by Christianity. So this was sort of a vital uh there's like a vital spirit to the Christian, like those Christians that was clearly based and had a basis in what they believed. And so I I don't even know if I would accept that statement that it's inherently like Nietzsche was a polemic and he attacked Christianity endlessly. And obviously, if you're worshiping Zeus, you're not a Christian. But I don't actually think that morally speaking, given the condition of Western civilization right now, there's a major difference. There's a general sense that like you're snuffing out like you're snuffing out biology, you're snuffing out people who are trying to live the traditional life. And all of these things I think are they actually can be connected far better than you think.
so you don't think that a common moral system would be important, or I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with you. The organizations that I run have to deal with um, multi-faith communities.
I'm not even sure. Like, do Protestants and Catholics have the same moral system?
Yes, I mean, like there's a huge approximation. Yes, I mean, like there's overlap of an enormous amount, so it's very easy to make an alliance on that basis.
Well, historically, that wasn't true. I mean, do Mohammedans and Catholics have the same moral system?
Much less, but at least there is the theistic thing there. This you can see this in theorists of, if you look at people who were creating we're opening up a can of worms here, you understand? But when we contrive post-Reformation legal systems, uh, Catholics and Protestants were given rights to bear witness and to do certain things, but you'd have like prohibitions on like atheists from holding public office or even necessarily testifying in court, because people were afraid that there would be no moral system that would bind them to not perjure themselves. And this is
Oh,
something you hear echoed in people like John Locke, for instance.
well, so I would say my primary goal is to basically create a type of Western man who is capable of overcoming the dysgenic or whatever you want to call it, uh, the oppressive power of the age. And there's no reason why that man can't be a Christian. So,
Sure. Yeah. No. I guess I just, and we're heading out the door here, but I mean, my worry is not that you're atheist. My worry is, okay, we got a bunch of guys together. Aren't we going to need to have some kind of idea that we all subscribe to a very similar moral system, that we're all, that not that we just have the same enemies, like that's good for the initial thing, but now that we're brothers in a cause, there is a common sense of what's sacred, a common sense of what's good, true, and beautiful, a common sense of what we're obligated to sacrifice for, a common sense of propriety. That has to be commonly understood. And like I said, I haven't solved this problem. Like the organizations that I'm involved with, we have religious diversity there, but I recognize that this challenge is coming in the future, because I'm not so sure you can have brotherhood without a, the closer the religions are, the easier it is to create that commonality, right? In the founding fathers, some of them were Congregationalists, some of them were Methodists, some of them were Presbyterians, some of them were Anglicans or whatever. Uh, there was one Catholic, but I think that common religious sense might be a necessary step to take the next step.
Well, why don't you leave me with that?
All right.
I'll ponder it.
Okay, well, Derek, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I know I asked you very challenging questions, but I hope that doesn't communicate any disrespect. You have a wonderful blog and am very inspired by your stories of organizing. Is there anything you would want to tell my audience about where they could find your great work and where they might be able to follow up on your ideas?
Yeah, so my Substack is just my name, Derek Suszko. That's Suszko. And to this question that we just ended on, I would encourage readers. I think I pinned it. It's the article "Christ and Nietzsche Towards Reconciliation." I think that has sort of the sum of my thoughts up to this point on that question. So I'd encourage all of your viewers to go read that.
So I noticed I just have a super chat, so I need to answer this before I drop off. Someone says, Jason McGinty for $5 says, there's a whole lot of fancy words to say you should torture life to the ground for my ideology. I think he's talking about the BPD woman. We already answered this extensively, Jason, but thank you for the super chat. All women have disadvantages. Maybe she's good enough. Maybe she's got enough other highly aristocratic, highly good things to make those risks worth the endeavor of achieving her. But Derek, thank you very much for coming on and answering my highly contentious questions. I encourage everyone to subscribe to your Substack and to follow your work there. And I'll just wish you a good evening, and my followers a happy rest of the week. I'll see you probably next week before I take a brief vacation. Cheers.
Thanks, Dave.